The forest was dark, the way space is dark. Not an absence of light so much as a weight of it, a pressure that pushed against the eyes and made the skin go cold. Sergeant Mara Voss had been lying in the undergrowth for 6 hours, and she had stopped noticing the dark 3 hours ago. What she noticed now was the silence where the insects had been. They came in without sound. That was the first thing you learned about the Vaethari. They had mastered the art of the quiet entry, the soft landing, the unhurried confidence of something that had never needed to fear the night. Their ships settled into the meadow below the ridge, like leaves dropped from a hand. No burn, no displacement, no thermal signature that any of her equipment could read. She had been watching for 44 minutes before she realized the nearest vessel was already on the ground and had been for some time. She did not move. She barely breathed. The air smelled of cut grass and something underneath it, mineral and cold, that she had learned to associate with them. She counted 7 individuals moving through the low brush, their limbs articulated at too many joints, their torsos elongated in a way that read as elegant from a distance and wrong up close. They carried instruments that looked organic, curved tools that pulsed with a slow bioluminescent light. They were cataloging. That was the word the xenobiologists used. Cataloging, as if the word made it manageable. Mara had 17 months of field time against the Vaethari. She had learned that the word for what they did was not cataloging. The word was claiming. She watched them work through her scope, her finger resting outside the trigger guard, her breathing measured and slow, until the comm in her ear crackled twice. The signal. She pressed herself flatter against the earth and began to count. At 45 she heard the high keen of their ship powering up, felt it in her sternum before she heard it in the air, and she watched the vessels lift in sequence. Silent, unhurried, impossibly graceful, and disappear into the overcast sky until there was nothing left in the meadow but flattened grass and the faint mineral smell fading on the wind. She waited another 20 minutes before she moved. The meadow was empty. She swept it with her scope, cleared the tree line in both directions, and walked down into the grass. The flattened circles were already beginning to spring back. In another hour there would be nothing. In another day there would be nothing at all. And she had been filing reports for 11 months about meadows, exactly like this one. On Sestra Aforo, on the Hadley outpost, on New Providence. And the reports had gone into the system, and the system had said thank you, and nothing had changed. She was reaching for her scanner when she heard it. Movement in the tree line to the east. Low, ragged, the sound of something large trying to be small. She brought her weapon up in a single motion and stood very still. Contact, she said quietly into her comm. East tree line, 40 meters. The comm was dead. She hadn't noticed it die. The movement stopped. She stood in the center of the meadow, with her weapon raised and the wind moving through the grass, and the mineral smell still fading, and she said, at normal volume, "I can hear you breathing." A long silence. Then the tree line shifted, and something stepped out. It was tall, taller than she'd expected, which was a strange thing to think, because she hadn't known to expect anything. It was thin in the Vaethari way, too many joints, torso too long, but it was wrong somehow, wrong in a way she couldn't place, and then she placed it. It was alone. She had never seen a single Vaethari separated from its group, not once in 17 months. It stood at the edge of the tree line and looked at her. She stood in the middle of the meadow and looked at it. Its eyes were large and dark in the dim light, and it made no move toward her and no move away, and after a long moment, it made a sound that she would describe later. In the report she filed that no one would read for 3 weeks, as follows. Low, sustained, harmonic. The kind of sound a cello makes when the bow is drawn very slowly across the lowest string. Her weapon was still raised. It made the sound again. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, which was a complicated thing to say and probably a lie. And she said it anyway, because her mother had taught her that you started with honesty, even when honesty was complicated. The alien said nothing. It stood at the edge of the trees and the slow bioluminescent pulse from the instrument it still held in one long-fingered hand faded and went dark, and Mara stood in the meadow and thought. It missed the ship. It got left behind, she thought. It's as scared as I am. She lowered her weapon 3 inches. Not all the way. Inches. The alien did not run. Her name for it in her head was Keys. She had not chosen the name deliberately. It came to her when she noticed the way it touched things. Surfaces, bark, the edges of her equipment when she set it down, with a peculiar, light pressing motion, like someone playing chords softly on a keyboard they couldn't quite reach. Keys. The name stuck the way unofficial names do, which is to say permanently and without apology. She moved them both off the meadow within the hour, because the meadow was too exposed and the Veytheri would come back. They always came back. She did not know if they would come back for their equipment, or their samples, or their left-behind colleague. But she knew they would come back, because in 17 months of watching them, she had never seen them leave anything behind without eventually returning for it. The thought sat in the back of her mind with its engine running. Keys moved well through the forest, better than she did, quieter, which she resented and noted, but it moved with a new quality she also noted. Hesitation. At unfamiliar obstacles, at sounds, at her, periodically as if recalibrating something, as if she was also an obstacle. She had a safe house 4 kilometers northeast, a cached supply point that wasn't in any official system, because Mara Voss had learned 11 months ago that official systems had leaks, and leaks had consequences, and consequences had body bags. The safe house was a pre-collapse agricultural building, 1 room of concrete walls, and a rusted metal roof that sang in the wind, and it had a water reclaimer, and 4 weeks of rations and a cot and nothing else. She had spent 3 weeks alone in it once after Sestrafi, and she knew exactly how long the walls took to start talking to you. Keys did not talk. Keys examined things. Reclaimer. The rations packaging, the surface of the wall, the grain of the wood in the doorframe, all with that same light-pressing touch, that keyboard motion, that quality of someone compiling something vast and careful. She watched it work and ate half a ration bar and didn't sleep. People are going to come back, she said, at around the 4th hour. Not a question. Keys turned from the wall it was examining. Its eyes caught the light of her lantern and held it. I'm not asking you to tell me when, she said. I'm telling you I know it. And when they do, I need to know if you're going to. She stopped. I need to know what you're going to do. Keys looked at her for a long moment. Then it turned back to the wall. She almost laughed. She ate the other half of the ration bar instead. 3 days in, she found out about the link. It happened without warning, which was how all of the worst things happened. She was cleaning her sidearm on the floor of the safe house, and Keys was in the corner, doing whatever Keys did in the corner, compiling, cataloging, something quiet and methodical. And she dropped the firing pin and swore, and in the same moment she felt something. Not heard, felt. A resonance, faint and harmonic, like the echo of a sound that hadn't been made yet. And she looked up, and Keys was looking at her with those large, dark eyes. And there was something in those eyes that she had not seen before. Not intelligence. She'd known it was intelligent. Something else, recognition. She picked up the firing pin. Hand was steady. Was that you? Keys made no sound, because that felt like you, she said. Keys looked at the firing pin in her hand. Then it looked at her face. Then it made a sound. Not the cello sound, something higher, shorter, and turned away. She assembled the sidearm and holstered it, and sat with her back against the cold concrete wall, and tried to explain to herself what had just happened. The Veythari had neural interface technology. She knew this from the briefings, from the dead scientists who had contributed to the briefings, from the report that said they used neural bridging too. The word the briefings used was survey. The minds of captured personnel, extracting topographic data, command structures, defensive positions. It was not a gentle process. The report had been very precise about this. What had just happened was not that. What had just happened was the alien equivalent of eye contact. She was almost sure of it. She sat with her back against the wall and watched Keys move through the small room and felt, against all good judgment, the first edges of something she was not prepared to name. On the 5th day, she let it outside. This was not a tactical decision. It was a decision made at 3 in the morning when she woke up to find. Keys pressed against the small window of the safe house, both hands flat against the glass, staring at the sky with an expression she did not have a word for. She lay on the cot and watched it for a long time. Then she got up, put on her boots, and opened the door. Keys turned from the window. It looked at her. It looked at the door. Don't go far, she said. It went out. She stood in the doorway with her weapon in her hand and watched it move into the dark yard, tipping its head back, extending that long torso toward the sky with all the yearning of something that knew exactly where it was supposed to be and could not get there. She had felt that feeling. After Sestra 4, after the extraction, after 3 weeks in a concrete room, she recognized it. "Your people have a signal range," she said. It didn't look at her. "The ships have receivers. If you can generate enough bandwidth, we could." She stopped. She was talking to it like it was a colleague. Like they were planning something together. She looked down at her weapon, and then back up at the sky, where Keyes was still looking, and she thought, "We are planning something together. We have been planning something together since the meadow." She just hadn't admitted it out loud until now. "Can get you materials," she said. "Building materials, I mean electronics. I have a cache 3 kilometers north with salvaged comms equipment. If you know what you need." Keyes looked at her. She spread her hands, a gesture that meant, "Well, what do you think?" And watched it process the gesture, the open palms, the slight forward lean, the questioning tilt of her head. It made the cello sound. "Yeah," she said. "That's what I thought." The device took 11 days to build and looked, when finished, like something between a satellite dish and a coral reef. Keyes worked with the salvaged electronics the way Mara worked with her weapons, with a fluency that was also love, a competence that went deeper than training and lived somewhere in the hands. She brought components and Keyes transformed them, and she stopped asking questions about the physics and started just passing the parts when the long fingers reached for them. On the 4th day of construction, she passed a section of copper wire and their hands touched, and the resonance came back. Stronger this time, less like an echo, more like a frequency finding its register. And she did not pull back, and neither did Keyes. They held that contact for 3 seconds, and she felt, in those 3 seconds, something she could only describe after the fact as the sensation of being known. Understood, not decoded, known. The way you feel known by something that has been watching you long enough to love you without wanting anything from you. She pulled back after 3 seconds because she was a soldier and she had objectives and an exfil timeline. And what she had just felt was not on any of those lists. She went back to passing components when they were needed and did not mention it. And neither did Keyes. And they worked in silence, and the device grew. She was 6 kilometers northeast of the safe house, scouting a route to the signal site when the Vathari found the building. She came back over the ridge and saw the cordon, 3 of their patrol craft hovering in a loose triangle over the agricultural field, their running lights pale blue in the gray morning. No movement on the ground yet. They were scanning. She counted 8 seconds of watching before the scan pattern told her everything. They weren't looking for Keyes. They were looking for her. This was not a recovery mission. This was an asset termination. She was half a kilometer from the building, and there was no cover between her and it. And there were 3 aircraft, and at least 12 personnel. And she stood on the ridge and did the math, and the math came back wrong in every configuration. Comm crackled. Not dead anymore. Someone had activated a relay. Urgent Voss. The voice was flat, official, familiar in the way bad news is familiar. "This is Commander Reyes. We have your location. We also have intelligence suggesting you've been harboring a Vathari individual for approximately 2 weeks. You are ordered to stand down and present yourself and the alien for extraction." She watched the cordon. "The alien is considered a high-value intelligence asset," Reyes continued. "Your cooperation will be noted." She thought about what the word extraction meant in this context. She thought about the briefings, the dead scientists, the word survey, and what it actually meant. "Noted," she said into the comm, which was everything she was willing to agree to. She clicked the comm off and ran. Keyes had heard them coming. She found it at the door of the safe house, with the device already collapsed into a configuration she hadn't seen before. Folded, portable, carried in both arms like something cradled. It looked at her when she came through the door, and she looked at it, and there was no time to say anything that mattered. So she didn't say anything at all. She held the door open and jerked her head north, toward the signal site, and Keyes went through the door without hesitation, and they ran. She had planned a route. She had planned 3 routes, actually. because she had known this was coming in some form, and planning was what she did. Alpha was direct, 4 kilometers, open terrain, time exposed. Beta was longer, 6 kilometers, used the drainage channels and the tree cover on the ridge. Beta was the right choice by every tactical metric she had. She chose route Alpha because they had maybe 40 minutes and the signal site needed 30 to initialize. And the math only worked one way. They hit the open terrain, and she heard the patrol craft behind them. "Don't stop," she said to herself as much as Keyes. "Whatever happens, don't stop." The ground was rough and pale in the morning light, frost-burned grass that crunched under her boots, and behind them the hum of the craft got louder. She looked back once and counted 2 of them, dropping altitude, and she looked forward, and the signal site was a kilometer ahead, and she thought, "We're not going to make it." Keyes stumbled. One of those extra joints caught wrong on the uneven ground, and it went down hard on one knee, and she stopped without thinking and got a hand under that long arm and pulled, and they ran. 200 meters. The craft were 200 meters behind them and closing. Keyes made a sound. Not the cello sound. Not the short, sharp sound. Something new, something that hit her in the chest cavity like a bell being struck. She felt it before she heard it, and she understood, in that struck bell moment, what it meant. The frequency was reaching. The device in Keyes' arms was transmitting. 100 meters. A light bloomed ahead of them. Not dawn, not the patrol craft, a third light. Coming from above, coming from far above and getting closer. And she understood what it was, and she ran harder. 50 meters. "Not so high," she shouted, which made no sense as a thing to shout, but she shouted it anyway, because the craft behind her were almost on top of them. And the light above was vast, and she was afraid people say what they mean without the filter of what makes sense. And then she started laughing, which also made no sense, and she heard Keyes make that struck bell sound again, shorter, higher, a different register, and she thought, "It's laughing too. I think that's laughter. I think we're both laughing." They hit the signal site at a dead run, and the light came down. Later, she would try to describe what happened at the signal site, and find that language had certain load-bearing limits. She would say, "There were more of them than she expected." She would say, "They came down the way the original ships had come down, quiet and precise, and without urgency." She would say, "One of them touched Keyes with a motion that was so clearly relief. Relief expressed in alien biology, in the rush of color through those long limbs and the particular angle of that extended torso, that she stood and watched it and felt her own chest tighten." What she would not say, in any report, was the part that came after. The Vathari who had come for Keyes, she counted 7, roughly the complement of the original botanical team, turned their attention to the patrol craft that had stopped, hovering at what Mara recognized as weapons range. She watched them assess the situation, watched them assess her. One of them, older by some quality she couldn't name, a gravity and a weariness in the way it held itself, looked at her for a long moment with those large dark eyes. She did not lower her weapon. She met its gaze. It turned to Keyes. What passed between them she couldn't decode. Long, harmonic, layered in ways that her ears caught only partially. Keyes gestured, that keyboard motion, those pressing hands, toward her weapon, toward the patrol craft. Keyes gestured again, something she couldn't read. And then the elder Vathari looked back at Mara, and she felt the resonance like a hand pressed flat against her sternum. Not painful, not invasive. Clear. She understood with the particular understanding that comes not through language but through some older channel, that it was asking something. Not for intelligence, not for tactical data, for her account. It wanted to know what had happened. From her, not from Keyes, not from the device, from the human who had stood in the meadow and lowered her weapon 3 inches. She kept her weapon where it was, and she thought about how to answer that, about what you say, to something that has the technology to simply take the answer and chooses instead to ask. Shh. She thought about Keyes pressing both hands against the window at 3 in the morning, about the resonance when their hands met over a piece of copper wire, about running across frost-burned grass in the gray morning, laughing. "We helped each other," she said. "That's all." She didn't know if it understood the words. She suspected the words weren't the part it was listening to. The elder looked at her for a long moment more. Then it made a sound she hadn't heard before. Broad, deep, something below the cello frequency, something architectural and final, and turned away. Trollcraft did not fire. She did not know why. She would think about it for years and not fully know why. Best theory, eventually, was that even Commander Reyes understood, watching from 200 meters up, that something was happening at the signal site, that weapons fire would not improve. Keyes was with the elder now, surrounded by the returned team, that color still moving through its limbs. It turned and looked at her, across the distance between them. She raised her free hand. Open palm, the gesture that meant, "Well, what do you think?" And watched it process this, the familiar gesture from an unfamiliar context. And then it raised one of its own hands and spread those long fingers wide, and she couldn't tell if it was copying her, or answering her, or both. She thought it was both. "Go home," she said. "Go home. I'll be right here." She had not intended to say that second part. It came out anyway with the unfiltered accuracy of things said under the open sky, with your hand still on your weapon and someone, you had 11 days of survival, with about to leave the atmosphere. Keyes lowered its hand. It made the cello sound, spits and sustained, and she felt it behind her ribs where it would stay for the rest of her life. And then it turned and walked into the ship, and the ship rose in the way all their ships rose. Without urgency, without apology, without looking back, and was gone. The debriefs started that afternoon. Commander Reyes was professional about it, which meant cold, which meant he had already decided what the report would say, and was working backward from the conclusion. She sat across a folding table in a prefab interrogation room that smelled of recycled air and answered every question accurately and completely. She had always been good at that. The accuracy was tactical. If she gave them everything true, they couldn't build anything false around it. Had 17 days with a Vatheri individual, Reyes said. He had a way of saying the word individual that made it sound like a word he'd chosen to avoid another word. You were never able to extract intelligence. I was never trying to extract intelligence, she said. Was trying to survive. Surviving is intelligence work, in your read of it. He looked at her across the table. He was not a stupid man. She had always known he was not a stupid man, and he looked at her, with the particular attention of someone processing a variable that doesn't fit their model. You built a communication device, he said. For it, I provided components. It built the device, the result of which was the return of a Vatheri unit to its fleet, along with, presumably, 17 days of observational data about one of our personnel, our supply cache locations, our patrol patterns, and 17 days of observational data about them, she said. He stopped. What they eat, she said, what they feel, how they build things, what scares them, what makes them. She paused. She thought about the struck bell sound and the quality of the elder's attention. Makes them pay attention, she said. That data is in my report, every hour of it, if someone reads it. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the prefab, the wind was up, which meant a weather front was moving in, which meant the meadows 6 kilometers southwest was probably already erased. No sign of anything that had happened there. You think you made contact, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I think we've been in contact for 17 months and causing it something, she said. And I think there's a difference between cataloging and claiming, and I think they found that difference too. He looked at her for a long time. She looked back. She had 17 months of field time against the Vatheri and 11 months of reports that no one had read, and she was 31 years old and sitting in a prefab interrogation room. And she was not afraid of him. Dismissed, he said. She stood, tucked her chair in with the careful precision of someone raised to leave things as she found them, and walked out. 2 months later, she was reassigned. Not disciplined, not discharged, reassigned, which in the language of institutions meant, we don't know what to do with you yet. Her new posting was a research station on the outer rim of the Sestra system, which was a long way from the agricultural meadows and a long way from any active Vatheri contact zone, and she understood that this was the point. She went. She did her work. She filed reports that were accurate and complete, and that no one read for weeks at a time. She learned the rhythms of the station, which creaked in the night, the way the safe house Rued creaked. The same note, the same wind. She slept badly in the way she had always slept badly, with one eye on the ceiling and both hands remembering something they were supposed to be holding. The research station had a communications array on its roof. She was assigned to maintain it. She did this with the particular care she brought to all things: checking connections, calibrating frequencies, cleaning contacts with the light pressing motion she had picked up somewhere and only recognized later as a habit she had borrowed. She ran the maintenance checks at the same hour every day, in the gray of early morning when the rest of the station was still asleep, and she stood at the edge of the array and looked at the sky and felt the mineral cold of the air, the weight of it, that pressure that pushed against the eyes. On the 63rd day she was running the morning checks when the array lit up. Not a malfunction. She knew what malfunction sounded like. This was a signal, structured, harmonic, layered at a frequency she had never seen in any comms protocol. And she stood at the edge of the array with a maintenance tool in her hand and listened to it with her whole body. It lasted 11 seconds, then it was gone. She stood there for a long time after, looking at the sky, at the lightning gray of it, at the place where the stars were still visible if you looked at the right angle. Right here, she said, not loud, to herself, mostly. To the frequency in the air, to the mineral cold, to the weight of the dark that was already lifting with the coming dawn. Down in the station, the breakfast shift was starting. She could smell the recycled coffee working its way up through the ventilation. Somewhere, on the floor below her, someone was laughing at something. She stood at the edge of the array and held the maintenance tool and watched the sky finish its slow business of becoming morning, and the laugh below her traveled up through the metal structure of the building and into the soles of her boots and up through her whole body, and she felt it the same way she had felt the resonance. Behind the ribs, in the chest cavity, that bell being struck, and she thought, they came back, she thought. They always came back, she thought. They found the difference too. She tucked the maintenance tool into her kit and turned back toward the hatch and went down into the warmth and the noise of people who were alive and getting ready to be alive again tomorrow. And the sky above the array was fully light now, pale gold at the edges, and somewhere out beyond the light, past the distance that had names, past the distance that only had numbers, something was still listening. She had been in contact for 17 months, and she'd called it something else. She had been in contact for 63 days, and she had called it reassignment. She had been in contact since the meadow, since 3 inches of a lowered weapon, since an open hand in frost-burned grass. She understood now what the elder had been asking at the signal site. Not for her account of what had happened, proof that the account would continue. That there was someone on the other end of the frequency, worth talking to. She had said, we helped each other. She had said, I'll be right here. Those 2 sentences, she understood now, were the entire history of first contact. Every species that had ever managed it had said them in some form. They were the load-bearing structure, underneath all the diplomacy, and all the war, and all the reports that no one read, and all the meadows that left no trace. We helped each other. I'll be right here. She descended into the station and got her coffee and sat down at her console and opened a new report file, and at the top she wrote the date and the time and the frequency of the signal and its duration, 11 seconds, and the exact harmonic layering as best she could transcribe it. And she thought about who would read it, and when and what they would make of it. And then she wrote one more line at the bottom of the file, outside the standard format she had never done before, and which she suspected would get her called into another prefab room with another cold commander. First response received. They remember us. She submitted the report and drank her coffee and looked out the window at the pale gold morning and waited for whatever came next. She was not afraid of whatever came next. She had 17 months of field time and 63 days of silence and 11 seconds of signal. And she was 31 years old. And she had learned the thing that it had taken humanity 10,000 years and 100 contact scenarios to learn, and then keep forgetting. The way to make something come back is to be worth coming back to. She had been worth coming back to. She did not know exactly how or why, only that she had stood in a meadow and lowered her weapon 3 inches, and that 3 inches had been enough. 3 inches. The distance between war and something else. She thought about Keeney's pressing both hands against the window in the dark, looking at the sky. She thought about the shape of that longing, alien and entirely legible. The same shape longing has in every species that has ever looked up and felt the distance. She thought, we are not so different, which was the oldest human thought, and also the most dangerous, and this was the part the briefings never included, the most accurate. Outside, the sun climbed. The morning shift filled the station with noise and coffee smell, and the specific low-grade chaos of people doing necessary work in a small space. Somewhere, an alarm was going off for a reason that was not an emergency. Someone was arguing about the calibration on a secondary scanner. Someone was laughing again. Mara Voss sat at her console and smiled without meaning to. The way you smile when you hear a sound you'd forgotten you missed. And she thought about 11 days in a concrete room, and the way copper wire feels when you pass it to someone who knows what to do with it. And she thought about frost-burned grass and the gray of early morning, and the specific quality of knowing you're not going to make it, and running anyway. She thought, that's the thing, isn't it? The running anyway, not the winning. Not the survival metric, or the tactical outcome, or the intelligence extracted. The running anyway, in the gray morning, in the frost-burned grass, with someone beside you who is also afraid and also running, and the light coming down from above, and the struck bell sound of something that could have taken what it wanted and chose instead to ask, and the open hand in the meadow, and the 3 inches, and the 11 seconds. That was the whole story. All 17 months of it. All 63 days of waiting. All 3 of her lifetimes of whatever was coming next. She finished her coffee. She opened the maintenance schedule for the communications array. She had work to do. The sky outside was blue now, properly blue. The gold of early morning burned off and replaced with the flat, clear blue of a day that intended to be a good one. She looked at it for a moment before she got to work. She cataloged it. Not in the claiming sense, in the other sense, the sense of pressing something lightly with both hands and feeling it press back. The blue of it. The particular weight of the light. She got to work.